Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
and I'm Stephen Park. And today we bring you our fourth read of Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jesse Q. Sutanto. This book has a very strong theme, which is this tea house and Vera, who is a tea maker.
Mhm.
And I think a fact that most people kind of know about me is that I actually learned to make teas by working at Teavana.
Mm.
It was a fairly widespread store for the time being. It was formed out of Atlanta. It was, in a sense, an appropriation, in my opinion, because it was like two white people from Atlanta that they did go to China to learn about tea making and things like that, but then took it and it created this like modernized version of, I don't know, I guess in this day and age, like a social media version of tea. And if you were ever in a mall at that time, it was like two canisters outside of the shop, and there was always a person there trying to like waft in people with this tea smell. It had good teas. They actually used fairly quality teas if you went up in price, and they also did a lot of work to make sure that all the workers there knew how to make the teas. So there was some good in it. They would actually take you through training and go through how to make each tea, go through the benefits of the tea, which from that standpoint, it seemed more like marketing and salesmanship rather than the actual like knowing what the benefits are. They had this thick book that you did have to study and memorize so that you can just work in retail for them. So through that, I actually learned to make teas. And I figured since we're reading a book about teas, and Vera's very much in the sense of utilizing teas for all the properties and benefits, I thought there's no better time than to share this with our listeners.
Absolutely. And I must say, as a passerby at Tiavana, the teas were delicious.
Mhm.
But yes, the unfortunate thing is that it became a franchise that was social media based.
Right. And they did eventually sell to Starbucks. So if anyone
Mm,
has gone to Starbucks, which we aren't very fond of Starbucks for
no.
a lot of reasons, but
Mhm.
if you have been to Starbucks, you've probably seen their teas, and it's the stuff that they'll use in certain drinks. I figured the best place to start is by asking you what your favorite tea is, Jamae.
My current favorite tea is peppermint tea, and something that I enjoy about peppermint tea, besides its flavor, is that it has these healing properties. But I don't know if that's some WebMD online type of knowledge that I gathered, but I feel like it's healing when I drink it.
And peppermint tea does have healing. It does have some benefits that do clear your throat, and when you're sick, it feels really nice. So there is a calming effect to peppermint tea, and
Hmm.
peppermint tea is usually considered an herbal unless there's another flavor with it. So if we just go straight peppermint and most herbal teas. So if you don't see an actual like green tea, oolong, or black tea, even white teas, that's the other major category,
Hmm.
then peppermint teas are going to be more classified as an herbal, which takes longer to steep and higher temperatures. So if you have any kind of herbals, which could be chamomile, most other florals and herbals, anything with like wood in it, things like that, you want to steep it at boiling temperature, which is usually around 205, around 210.
Fahrenheit.
Yeah, sorry, 205, 210 degrees Fahrenheit. And you want to steep it for a long time. The good thing about herbals is you can't over steep it, nothing will burn. And so you can kind of just let it sit there. So some of the teas you'll see, like reishi tea or teas that are like throat coat, they're
Yeah.
mainly herbal teas. And that's why you see them steamed for so long, is to get as much flavor as you can out of them.
Hitting us with that knowledge.
Yeah. And for people that like peppermint green tea, that's where this becomes a little bit more tricky. So when I was growing up, I used to drink tea that was very bitter. The way my mom
Mm,
used to make green tea was she would throw it in a cup, and then the tea leaves would just stay at the bottom of the cup or the glass.
for sure. But that would make it burn a little, right?
Yeah, so you get this super bitter flavor. So I always thought that that's what tea was supposed to taste like, was just massively bitter. But the reason why it was happening is exactly that. It was burning. So if you have peppermint green tea, what you need to do is play it to the lowest common denominator, which is the green tea. So the
Mm,
green tea should usually be steeped at around 170 to 175 for about 2 to 3 minutes. If you have something that's a little bit thicker, something like a jasmine pearl ball or something that's rolled up, then you can steep it for a little bit longer, but you never want to raise the temperature because that's usually what burns tea. So if you always want to play it safer, you can do it at a little bit lower temperature and steep it for maybe another 10, 20 seconds just to get that flavor out. White teas are the only tea that are lighter than green teas, so that's usually about 165 to 170 at about 2 to 3 minutes. If you go with oolong, then you're going to go about 2 to 3 minutes at about 180 to 185 degrees Fahrenheit. And then with your black teas, you want to go more 190 to 195 degrees Fahrenheit for about 2 to 3 minutes as well.
For sure. So most of the teas with tea leaves, we don't want it to boil.
Right, because then you're just burning it and you're immediately going to get a bitter flavor. So
For
anytime
sure.
you put that much direct heat on it, it's going to start not tasting the original flavor that it should. And all of the intricacies and delicacies that are supposed to come out of the tea leaves, you will not get.
Totally. And I didn't find this out until I was an adult that you had specific temperatures to watch out for in order for the taste to be actually flavorful rather than burnt.
Right. And I think it's something that a lot of people don't know. And so they'll just drink tea and think it's bad versus
Yeah,
being able to figure out really good tea.
totally. And I think the reason why I found out that teas were actually delicious was because of boba.
Yeah. 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 Because I was making tea properly in vast quantities.
Yes.
The other thing you can do is if you're not sure about what your temperatures are, because I highly recommend if you really want to get into teas, is to get a kettle with a temperature setting. But
Mm,
if you don't have that, or if you're at work, the little water dispensers that have the heat is usually set about 180 to 185. So somewhere between an oolong and sometimes maybe a black tea. So what I'll usually do is pour mostly hot water and put a little bit of that cold water in just to cool it down. So usually about like 6/8 to 7/8 of hot water. And that usually gets it cold enough that I could do a really good green tea.
mm,
But yeah, there are little strategies that you can use here and there. I would say if you want to play it safe, go a little cooler. If you're still a little bit nervous about doing some of this process with teas and still want to get the flavor, you can always do a cold brew. So you can just let
mm,
it sit in some kind of container. Usually have a tea bag so you don't have to get all the tea leaves out of there or have a strainer attached to it. That's a really easy way to get really good tea. For people that are curious about yerba mate and drinks like that, that's a very specific regional one that the way that we learned it was putting it at high temperature for about 2 to 3 minutes as well. So that's more boiling, but I don't really know that
mm.
one super well. All I know more confidently are the tea leaves, and we make a lot of tea at home, especially during the winter
Yes,
months, and usually our tea turns out really good as long as we're paying some amount of attention to it.
for sure. So what's your favorite tea, Stephen?
Oh, it is the jasmine green tea pearls. So
Mm-hmm.
it's the round ones, and the way that they're made is that they get individual tea leaves and they roll them into a ball. So you'll have about 5 tea leaves all wrapped in one, and then you just put that in water and it'll start to bloom as it's in there.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings me to my other point, which is you can reuse tea leaves for flavor. You
Mm,
can't reuse them for caffeine. The caffeine's usually sucked out in about 20 to 30 seconds of the first brew.
I
So if
see.
you want a decaffeinated tea but don't have decaffeinated tea, you can do a first brew, throw that out, and then reuse those tea leaves to make another batch of tea, and that should be well more decaffeinated than the first brew was. So you
Nice.
can use most tea leaves for about 2 to 3 times as long as you have some really good tea. So don't throw out your tea leaves, especially if you know you're going to sit there all day and want to drink it more than once.
Absolutely. It's a great way to be sustainable as well as eco-conscious.
Yeah, and it's also just still worth it. It's
Yes.
so much flavor in there. You can get more juices out of it.
Yes.
So that's almost everything I know about tea. That is my recommendation for the week. But if you stick around, next will be Jamae's recommendation for the week.
Our recommendation for the week is also tea focused. Inoki Bathhouse, founded by Helen Yin, offers spa grade tea baths and elevated self care essentials with a sustainability focus. And thankfully, they offer global shipping. So, what I appreciate about Inoki Bathhouse is not only do they talk about their tea blends and how you can seep them into your bath or shower, I also appreciate that they talk about their processes, they talk about and share their culture, and they stand by their beliefs. You can find them on Instagram at Inoki_Bathhouse. That's INOKI_BATHHOUSE.
Yep. And with the website, it's INOKIBATHHOUSE. So no underscore for the website.
Yes.
And that is going to be our recommendation for the week. Okay, so fourth and final read of Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jesse Q. Sutanto. And this read involved pages 253 through 333. which were chapters 30 to 40 plus that blog. What have we learned all the way up to this read?
So, up to this point, we learned that Vera's store got broken into, and that made Julia feel obligated to offer Vera a place to stay. And while staying with Julia and Emma, Vera settles into a routine, showing her kindly, motherly side.
Yeah, and on top of all that, what we've been getting is this growth of relationship and friendships, which
Mm-hmm.
we'll see as we get into this current read that we just did.
Absolutely.
So there are some events that happen before, but the major events that start to happen is leading with Julia, who is starting to get this massive following within her photography realm.
She starts off with this TikTok influencer, Cassie Red, and by starting with this person, she's able to gain a following from Cassie Red through TikTok and Instagram.
Right, so she's starting to become famous, but along with that, she's kind of working these odd hours that leaves her in the house by herself. And within this, she gets this point where she feels like someone is in the house with her. And this leads to her kind of somewhat freaking out. It also leads her to finding Oliver's manuscript that Vera was reading.
And she reads it herself and is upset because she feels as though Oliver betrayed her. Not only that, in this manuscript, Oliver writes about how his character, or the character that kind of represents him, wants to take care of things with his brother's character.
Right. So she feels betrayed because Oliver's character in this book had this long lasting love for the character that represents Julia.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like you said, there was a point where Oliver's character kind of admits to getting rid of or handling the character that is Marshall.
Yeah.
This becomes an issue because as she's standing in her house, Officer Gray comes to kind of deliver her some news about the insurance money that Julia and Marshall had taken out prior to his death.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot of money.
Yes, it's $700,000. That gets them set up for a good part of life.
Right, and it's kind of fishy because it happened just before Marshall died.
And right before the divorce happens.
Right, and Officer Gray remembers those bags on the floor when she first came into that apartment.
Mm-hmm.
In this whole storm of everything, eventually Officer Gray is settled with Julia's whereabouts and her alibi. But what she ends up doing is taking the manuscript that Julia had, which was Oliver's manuscript, which in a sense can be seen as some form of premeditated murder.
Well, that brings me to wondering, is it fair to think of fiction writing as autobiographical?
I think it's harder because these characters were so clearly delved in the characters that are supposed to be real life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's fair, but I do think it brings enough suspicion that would drive Officer Gray to wanting to bring Oliver in for investigation.
Right, which is what Officer Gray does. Officer Gray uses the manuscript as a way to get a warrant into Oliver's apartment.
Right. And this is where things get a little bit more complicated with Oliver. He is still standing by the point that he didn't kill Marshall.
Mm-hmm.
We know that he did do something guilty. We don't find out until later what he actually did.
Right.
But up to this point, Oliver is still claiming his innocence.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, Officer Gray doesn't seem to think of him as innocent.
Right. It doesn't eventually matter because by law, you can't just take someone in for questioning without having a lawyer there.
Right.
So Oliver comes out, and where he goes to next is this black tie dinner that Vera sets up for everyone. And the purpose of this dinner is to unearth the killer.
Right. But unfortunately, all is revealed at this dinner.
Right,
One thing that's revealed is that Sana and Ricky are dating.
right.
Another thing that's revealed is how Julia's been doing so well with her photography business. Unfortunately, on the other end, when Oliver does arrive to the black tie dinner, Julia admits to handing the manuscript to Officer Gray.
And she admits to it without knowing that Oliver has gone in for an investigation because of that.
Mm-hmm.
And Oliver originally comes attacking Vera because he thought that Vera was the one that maybe purposefully gave the manuscript to the police.
Mm-hmm. But Vera is not at fault here, at least not for this particular reason.
Right. What she is at fault for is the fact that she actually broke into her own store.
So she didn't break into her own store. What she did was break the jars in her store.
Well, she made people think that someone had broken into the store.
True, very true. And she did that because she thought that the police wouldn't do anything if she only said that she felt someone had messed with her tea jars.
Right, which she was pretty adamant about.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, while she's giving all this away, she also lets them know that she found this flash drive and laptop with all the information that had led up to kind of revealing who Ricky was, who Sana was, what this artwork was that Marshall had hidden. But everyone's pissed.
Yes, everyone's mad because she tampered with evidence, and unfortunately, that evidence disappeared as well.
Right. Vera has no idea where it went, though.
Mm-hmm.
But not only is everyone angry at Vera, but the whole group has started to fall apart. Because Oliver's obviously angry at Vera for thinking that she gave the manuscript. Sana is angry at Ricky for finding out that Ricky was the one that created this bot that kind of blew up this NFT business.
Mm-hmm.
And then Julia is angry at Oliver for having these feelings and emotions for her without revealing it, and then thinking that Oliver was trying to get back into her life as a lover.
Right. So everyone's mad at everyone. And not only that, Julia is mad at Vera because Vera had all of this information and didn't share it with her and was living under her roof.
Right. So Julia felt betrayed and felt used by Vera.
Mm-hmm.
So this leads the group to this massive blow up, and no one's talking to anyone at this point. But the worst part is that with the anger that Julia has at Vera, Julia has also kicked Vera out of her house. And this leads Vera to having this massive depression where she locks herself in her house and just refuses to come out.
But she doesn't lock herself in. Instead, she kind of leaves the door open for anyone to walk into her tea house.
And the person that ends up walking in is her arch rival, I guess, the
Yes,
nemesis.
Winifred, the patisserie owner.
Right. And Winifred is actually concerned for Vera because she hasn't really heard anything and hasn't heard Vera move in several days.
Mm-hmm. But she does say when Ricky shows up that she saw Vera go up to the apartment at some point.
And so that's when Ricky finds Vera. What we see is that Vera is very weak. She is needing a lot of care. And through this, it kind of rebonds everyone because everyone starts to realize that they still care for each other. They have created this family and this bond through this instance of someone passing away and trying to really regain their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And they also start to figure out how important Vera was to them and what it meant for Vera to bring them all together and kind of go on this journey.
Yes, Vera is this glue for this family.
Hmm.
So with this, they forgive Vera and they start forgiving each other.
Right.
Sana forgave Ricky because she realized her privilege and knew that Ricky did what he did because he needed the money.
We also see Julia forgiving Oliver, with Oliver just kind of coming to the point that he never wanted to be Julia's lover. He just wanted her friendship back.
Yes. And so they became best friends again.
Yeah. And I'm very glad that that's the storyline and they didn't become lovers. Because, like I said, that was a kind of semi troubling storyline if it went that way.
It was. Do you feel sad that they didn't become lovers?
No, because he can also still become a very wonderful uncle to Emma. He can still resume his friendship with her, and they can still find people that are compatible. I feel like in some ways, friendships are a stronger bond sometimes than what you have with your partner or your spouse because things can go a little bit deeper, and there's not that concern of, oh, what if this person thinks this way? I don't know. I feel like friendships kind of form this bond where there is no judgment, which I know there is that with your partner and spouse as well, but I feel like there's not that quite same fear of having this interconnectedness of economy and livelihoods and friendships. Like it's just kind of like you're friends.
I see what you're saying about the connection being deeper because there is no romantic link.
Right,
When there's a romantic link, it's like, oh, of course you're gonna be together.
right,
But when you're friends, it's like, oh, you don't have to be together, but you're deciding to stick together.
right, right,
Also, something else that I thought about was that it would be traumatizing to Emma if Oliver became her dad.
right. That's why it was a little concerning that this seeming relationship was possibly forming.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pretty happy that it didn't.
For sure. Even though to me it kind of felt jarring that Oliver didn't have this feeling for Julia anymore, I was glad. I was glad that he showed and fully expressed that he's not into Julia that way.
Right. So as everyone's getting together, we see Vera healing, we see emotions healing, and we see the final recovery of Vera and her release from the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
In a form of celebration, Vera only finds it suitable that she goes into her tea house and has everyone celebrate with a beverage. She is doing her best to prepare the best tea that she could possibly think of because
Mm-hmm.
the moment indicates that. And as she's going through her resources, she's imagining what would go the best, but also kind of thinking about her most expensive ingredients. And that's where it hits. And that's where we get, I think, the climax of the story, which happens a chapter away from the end
Yes.
or even at the last chapter.
The last chapter of the book, right before the epilogue.
Right. And so what Vera eventually ends up realizing is that one of the teas that she would have never broken is bird's nest. She finds that it's missing.
Mm-hmm.
And then she starts putting two and two together that Marshall was killed by this bird dander. She thinks about who possibly could have stolen it. And that's when we get to who the murderer actually is.
Yes.
Because it was always a murder.
And it's who you said all along. It
I
was
mean, it wasn't all along, and it was a very wild guess.
it was a wild guess, and we find out that the murderer is Alex.
Yeah, and I purely went off of vibes. It was by no means with any kind of evidence.
Mm,
But everything started pointing to Alex once we got that information. It was such a great twist.
yes.
I think you even said in our last podcast that if it's Alex, it would be such a crazy twist.
Right, it was wild. And when Vera realizes this, she storms over to Alex's apartment and Alex shares everything that happened.
Right. And we'll leave that mainly to the book because I think the description of how this is revealed is very well written.
Mhm.
But pretty much what we get is that Alex, who was Vera's favorite customer, was Marshall and Oliver's father.
Mhm.
And Alex ends up putting away his son because of what Marshall had become, which was this monster. And in a certain sense, it seemed very iconic and somewhat appropriate in the sense it was the father who created and the father who had taken away.
Mhm. It felt kind of like one of those folklore deity type stories.
Right. And by no means was Alex comfortable with the scenario.
No, not at all.
It took him so much to actually put this plan into action, but we also got all these stories of who Marshall was. We got the evil character that was built up through so many different lenses,
Mhm.
and the way the author did it, we never saw a good side to Marshall. So
Right.
if he was a good person, it was not that we recognized as a reader and only entering the small snippet of this world, but we finally got the resolution of Dr. Frankenstein taking away its monster.
Mhm.
How did you feel about this ending?
I felt like it made sense. It felt right. Not that it was right that Marshall was killed, but like you said, it felt as though all the knots were tied tightly.
I felt so shocked by this ending.
Mm,
I think the way this book was written, it became much more about the characters than it did about the story of the murder or the murderer.
mm, exactly.
So by the time we got to the tea house and Vera was settling down with everyone and the camaraderie was there, I was so relieved and in such a place of finality that I felt like everything had settled. So the fact that this popped up was so fascinating. And even with that disruption so close to the end, like you said, it still felt like the bow was tied. It didn't feel like I was displaced. It felt like more things had come together than I even thought would come together.
Interesting. I was a little different. When Vera recovered and was back in the tea house, I was like, that's it? We're not going to figure out who murdered Marshall. But when she had the aha moment, I was like, yes!
Hmm.
We finally get to know who did it.
Yep. And it just was such a great way to do it. It even included the next door neighbor in a way that showed her innocence.
Hmm.
So that was never in question. we even get the epilogue where we see this beautiful ending of how everyone's lives are doing so well.
Yes.
We see Sana and Ricky kind of giving back to the NFT people who had lost their money.
Mm,
We see Julia kind of thriving in her business, and Vera is settling into this new family role with Emma and being able to fulfill this need that she's had of being a caregiver and a caretaker from this experience of being a caregiver and caretaker to all these younger people.
absolutely. And we also see Oliver and Tilly find this bromance.
I guess so. It's a bromance through hardship by poor parenting. I
Guess
mean,
so.
the good ending though is Oliver also makes up with his father, who
Mm,
he had such a terrible relationship for so long. So
mm-hmm.
there's so much happiness in this book. The ending was very happy, but I would say overall, the whole book kind of contained this sense of joy and lightheartedness that I felt like I so needed and was so refreshing to have from a lot of the other reads that we had.
Absolutely. It could have gone dark really fast,
Mhm.
but you're right. It was lighthearted throughout and it was focused on the relationships and how the relationships made them better.
Right. Especially from a book where the title says murderers, you would
Mm,
not think that you would have this much joy reading through these pages.
totally.
So, in that sense, would you recommend this book?
I would highly recommend this book. I would recommend this book to anyone who's in a reading slump because not only is there such joy throughout the pages, but the writing is so well done that you don't even realize that so much has happened.
Right. I would also recommend this book to everyone, but more specifically, I think personally, I've been recommending this book to people who are first generation immigrants into America because the character of Vera is so familiar as a first generation American. The struggle of trying to find money and then buying a shop, and then even who Tilly is, who is a lot of us who have benefited from the hard work from our parents. And to be honest, I don't know about y'all, but there were moments in my life where I very much so can look at and see myself neglecting my parents
Mm.
and see that side that I wasn't a good son. My mom is wild and she can be so crazy sometimes and she's so funny, but all I had to do as her son was to call her once a week and it made her day. It made her week.
Absolutely.
And so for me not to do that, I can see myself in this form of Tilly, who is this tiny character within this book. But as someone who is a first generation American, that put me so far into the story and being able to follow Vera, who is like my mother, and being
Mm.
able to see her get into these fictional shenanigans and kind of enjoy all that.
Absolutely. I would agree with that.
This was so fun. But now I think I'm ready to get back into some of the darker books.
Same.
Our next book is a little bit on the darker side. It's a dystopian novel,
Mm-hmm.
but let me get into the hints at Jam. So, hint number one, this book was originally released in Korea in 2020 and has been translated and started hitting American shelves on February 27th, 2024, so this year. Hint number two, this is a dystopian novel, which me and Jamae are big fans of.
Yes, absolutely.
Hint number three, this book was actually recommended by one of our readers. So it's our first reader recommended book.
Yes.
And I am so excited to read this book. The title is Snow Globe by Soyoung Park. So let's find out a little bit more about this book by looking at the back cover. The synopsis says, in a world of constant winter, only the citizens of the climate controlled city of Snow Globe can escape the bitter cold, but this perfect society is hiding dark and dangerous secrets within its frozen heart. Enclosed under a vast dome, Snow Globe is the last place on Earth that's warm. Outside Snow Globe is a frozen wasteland, and every day citizens face the icy world to get to their jobs at the power plant, where they produce the energy Snow Globe needs. Their only solace comes in the form of 24-hour television programming, streamed directly from the Dome City. The residents of Snow Globe have everything: fame, fortune, and above all, safety from the desolation outside their walls. In exchange, their lives are broadcast to the less fortunate outside, who watch eagerly, hoping for the chance to one day become actors themselves. Chobam lives for the time she spends watching the shows produced inside Snow Globe. Her favorite? Go Around, starring Go Hari, Snow Globe's biggest star, and it turns out the key to getting Chobam her dream life. Because Hari is dead and Chobam has been chosen to take her place, only life inside Snow Globe is nothing like what you see on television. Reality is a lie, and truth seems to be forever out of reach. This book sounds wild,
It sounds like a great dystopian novel.
a little bit Hunger Gamesy.
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
So let's find out a little bit more about the author, Soyoung Park. So this is, I believe, her first book. Snow Globe is a duology, and it's also the winner of the original story award by Changbi and Cacao Page Young Adult Novel Award.
Hmm.
This book, like I said earlier, has originally been written in Korean, so the translation, we'll see how it goes. But yeah, I don't know. I haven't read a dystopian novel in a while.
Same. I think the last time that I read a dystopian novel, I was still in college.
Yeah, I tried to read Brave New World for a little bit, and it became too real with everything that's going on, so I
Mm.
kind of shut it down. So we'll see how this goes. I mean, I don't know. Dystopian novels right now seem a little fresh,
It seems, like you said, a little real considering the climate that we're in.
right? And according to this, the climate is very cold.
Yes.
So our first read is going to be pages 1 through 77, chapters 1 through 8, and we're separating this book into 5 reads. So we're kind of taking our time through it, but hopefully we have a lot of exciting information as we navigate our way through this book.
Yes. And for those of you who are following along on the physical book, the chapters don't have numbers, but they have titles. So for everyone, that's The Age of Snow Globe to The Promised Land.
Right, right, right. I'm hoping that you had the chance to enjoy Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers with us. It was such a random book that I think we just kind of stumbled across, and I'm so happy that we did.
Totally.
If you have any thoughts and opinions on this book, or if you're also excited to read Snow Globe like we are, also, if you want to share a recommendation and you want us to give out your name, we are more than willing to do so. We also just don't want to give anyone's name out without their consent.
Absolutely.
So please write that on your email if that is something that you want. We love giving little shout outs, so we would love to give you the credit for finding this book for us. But how can people reach out to us if they are wanting to do that?
You can reach us through email at asianbookclubpod@gmail.com, or you can join the conversation at Instagram at asianbookclubpod.
We also have our website, which is asianbookclubpod.com, which has our bookshop that has books that we've read in the past, books that we recommend, and books that we plan to read in the future.
And a great way to support us is to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast.
Otherwise, make sure to be happy, be healthy, and read a book.
Ingat!
Bye.
Bye!